So what's up with the blues and Langston Hughes? The blues can primarily be considered one of three things. I think first of all, a lot of people consider the blues to be an emotion or a feeling. I mean, people talk about, oh, he's got the blues or I've got the blues, and it's usually used to connote a melancholy or downtrodden feeling. And that's what a lot of the blues singers will sort of get across in their lyrics. Secondly, blues can be considered a whole musical genre. There's a lot of different sub-styles of blues. I mean, I think earliest we have an acoustic or finger-style blues, and that would be followed by a swing-style or jazz-style blues, all the way up to blues-inspired rock and roll of the 60s and 70s with people like Jimi Hendrix or Jimmy Page, and really just a slew of other rock artists. And finally, the blues is actually considered a musical form, of which the 12-bar blues is the most popular, and that's just a 12-bar chord progression using the first, fourth, and fifth scale degrees of any given key. And all of the examples that I'll be playing today will be in the key of A, so we're going to use the first scale degree, which would be A, the fourth, which would be a D, and then the fifth, which would be E or E7. Probably the earliest examples of blues music that we have that was written for the guitar would be what we would consider an acoustic or fingerstyle blues. And there's actually stories of early Delta blues musicians sort of crafting their own makeshift guitars or lute-style instruments out of whatever they had available and playing the blues with those. And one thing that's a really signature technique about early acoustic blues players was that often they played without a rhythm section, so they would actually sort of tap their foot and use that as a percussion and also sort of play a walking bass line with their thumb. But here's an example of an acoustic style blues. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think there are several things that make blues as a genre unique from Western music that really came before it. If we compare the typical 12-bar blues style to a classical example like this, we see that they're very widely different. That particular example, Pachelbel's Canon in D, really gains its complexity by constructing a melody of very quick 16th notes that really just arpeggiates some of the chord tones as you move through the chord progression in D major. Now, the blues is actually very different. In early blues, you don't see a lot of very quick runs on the instrument. The musicians rather just choose really a few chord tones and try and make those tones as expressive as possible. And one of the ways that they do that specifically on the guitar is by applying a bend to the strings, where you would actually pick a scale tone and bend the string to either raise or lower it in pitch. And you could also do that and add vibrato and sort of produce more feeling that way. Another thing that I think makes the blues as a genre unique from traditional or classical music is the use of antiphony. Most classical pieces, and especially when you start talking about big bands or orchestras, most of the music written for those types of arrangements is considered polyphonic, where you have multiple voices sort of all playing together towards the same harmonic end. Now, antiphony, you have something completely different, and that's really, you have two competing voices, and so we get the call and response structure that the blues is really famous for. And they apply that call and response structure in a variety of different ways among different instruments. I think the most popular instance of the call and response structure would be between a vocalist and an instrumentalist, where the vocalist would actually sing or rhythmically chant their sort of blues mantra, and then you would have an instrumentalist, either a piano or a bass or a guitar, come in and sort of, throw a fill in it towards the end of that. The other thing that we can do is the instrumentalists could also enact this sort of call and response structure by themselves or amongst each other. And so on the guitar, I would actually play through the rhythmic form, but also interject lead lines, or what could be considered the response part of that structure. And so here I'll give you an example of how you would have a call and response between the vocalist and the instrumentalist, and I apologize in advance for my horrible singing. So 1, 2, 3, 4. The river keeps on rising, too high to stand. The river keeps on rising, too high to stand. And oh Lord, help me, 'cause I can hardly swim. Keep going like that, and the vocalist would begin again. Now here's an example of how, as an instrumentalist, I would sort of use that antiphony and apply that call and response structure by myself as I'm playing sort of both a rhythm and lead part. 1, 2, 3, 4. So now that we have a better understanding of the blues as a musical genre and the blues as a musical form in general, and we've listened to several examples of how you can apply the blues structure to the guitar, perhaps we're better suited to answer the question, so what's up with the blues and Langston Hughes? And looking at the poem The Weary Blues from 1923, I can draw several connections between the blues player that Hughes mentions and my own knowledge of the blues and my own playing life. I think one of the things that sticks out most prominently to me is how Hughes really tries to capture the melancholy of this situation and of this blues exchange by repeating lines such as, "Oh blues," or "sweet blues," and to me that sort of seems like what we would call a fill or something that an instrumentalist, or even if you were playing by yourself and singing, something that you would, like a little lick that you would throw in towards the end of a line that would really be particularly melancholy. So like this, for example. An example of one of those very bended notes we talked about earlier that was really tried to be, made particularly expressive. Another thing that I think is fairly prominent is the use of antiphony throughout the poem. I think if we take the voice of the poet, or Hughes's voice, as one particular set of music or a voice, and then we take the pieces in quotation marks, or the blues of the blues singer as a different voice, he actually sets up that call and response structure within the poem. And he also does that between the audience and the blues singer as well within the first 3 lines. Droning a drowsy syncopated tune, rocking back and forth to a mellow croon, I heard a Negro play. So what he's doing there is he's setting up this dual relationship between the player and the audience, because for early blues musicians, there wasn't really that barrier between audience and player, because the audience was also sort of expected to participate in the blues and sort of add in their own lyrics or chants or screams or yells. So they were, very participatory in this way. And then the last thing that I think is in line 23, thump, thump, thump when his foot on the floor. I think Hughes is really trying to stay true to the origin of the blues, and so we have this picture of this pianist who's playing by himself, singing, playing, most likely playing a lead part with, his right hand chords with his left hand, and then also using his foot to both keep time and as sort of a percussive element. So I think throughout here, Hughes's poem isn't only trying to give you a picture of his experience watching this blues player, it's really trying to also give you a better understanding of the origins of the genre itself and how important those origins are to the poets of the Harlem Renaissance.